A Missouri grand jury could begin hearing evidence as early as Wednesday in the shooting death of Michael Brown. And joining me right now are two attorneys. Midwin Charles, a criminal attorney who also hosts a radio program on WBLS, and Philip Holloway, a former prosecutor and policeman, both. Well, you've got two perspectives. Ms. Charles, thank you for joining us. And what do you think we're going to get from the science so far about the nature of this incident? It's all we know is it's an incident. We don't know it's a crime yet. What can we tell?
I think what we can tell from the autopsy, is, at least with the one that we have by Dr. Bodden, is how Michael Brown died and the manner in which he died. And that's what makes autopsies so important and so relevant when you're talking about criminal trials, because what they do is they paint a picture. They let people know exactly what happened, which is so important for justice, because that is the purpose of a trial. Sure. And so when you start to look at this autopsy and you take it along with the one done by the medical examiner of Ferguson, as well as the one that's going to be done by the federal government, you put all three together, and I don't think that you're going to get any disparity from those three different autopsies. But once you put it together, you start to put together the pieces of the puzzle with respect to what happened on that day. And that's what the people of Ferguson want, and it's what America wants.
What do you think you can tell from the number of bullet holes, if you will, in the body of Michael Brown, and perhaps the sequence in which they were fired? Can you tell that he should have been no threat to anyone after being shot 3 times or 4 times in the arm, and therefore there was no justification for shooting him in the head if those were the subsequent bullets? I mean, what can we discern here so far, do you think?
Well, Chris, I'll tell you this. I've spoken with several NYPD officers. I have 1 or 2 who do investigations for me at my law firm, and they've all said that 6 bullets to someone who is unarmed is a little bit unusual. Usually you would fire off 1 shot, and then you would determine that the person doesn't have a firearm or is not necessarily a threat. So right off the bat, I'm thinking 6 bullets is excessive. I also think that those 6 bullets, the fact that he was unarmed, as well as some of the witness statements that we've seen so far, give us enough probable cause for at least an arrest. I think a lot of the problems that we've seen right now is that people have been conflating a trial with the standards for an arrest, and they're very, very different. All you need for an arrest is probable cause, yes.
Is based upon the number of bullets.
For me, yes, the number of bullets and the fact that Michael Brown was unarmed.
Okay, let me go to Phil Holloway. Mr. Holloway, the same question to you. What can you discern from the evidence so far that we've gotten here in these 2 autopsies?
Well, I'm going to defer to Dr. Bodden, who earlier today said that we really don't know from the forensics that he was able to achieved today with his autopsy. We don't know what happened at the critical moment when the shots were fired, because you got to remember, police officers, whether or not somebody's armed or not, they're authorized to use deadly force if they believe that they are in danger of losing life or limb. Police officers are trained to shoot to stop the threat. They are not limited to a number of rounds to achieve that goal. They will shoot until the threat, as they perceive it to be, is eliminated. So the ultimate question for investigators is, what is the truth of the matter at the time the shots were fired? Each and every one of the shots. Muzzle to target distance becomes an issue. All of these things are things that a good investigator will look at.
How do you discern the difference between what is defending oneself against an immediate threat, which is you're allowed to do, and anger, which would cause you to keep shooting?
A lot of that may be in the eye of the beholder, and of course a good investigator, as I was saying, is going to follow the evidence objectively to the truth, whatever that truth may be. You know, we've already seen a lot of these witness statements. We heard initially in the days following the shooting that he was shot in the back. Well, today we now know that that's not true. At the most, he was shot in the top of the head. Everything else was to the front. So we know that some of these eyewitness accounts are not accurate. For what reason, that remains to be seen. But there's a lot that has left to be done. We need to fingerprint the car. We need to look at all of the evidence. We need to look at shell casings. Where did they land? What exactly did the officer say? Can it be corroborated? All of those things are things that have to be looked at by an objective investigator before we can get to the truth of the matter.
Ms. Charles, what do you think of the phrases that have been using? There's been some very loud and I should say loaded language here. Execution. Broad daylight, as if this police officer, people truly believe that a white police officer was driving along and saw a large black African-American fella and decided to just shoot him. Do you think that's what happened? just decide to gun the guy down. Do you think that's what happened here? I mean, you're pretty serious about believing the officer was wrong. At what level do you think he was wrong? He just didn't like the guy's looks, or what are you accusing him of right now?
Well, I'm not going to try him before we get all the evidence in. What I'm talking about is...
But you want him arrested.
Of course, but that's not a trial.
Well, tell me why you want him arrested. Why have you gotten that far with this thinking, your own thinking?
Because he's killed an unarmed 18-year-old with 6 bullets. And you know, where I come from, that's enough for probable cause. I don't understand why so many people are kind of jumping through holes and requiring so much information and so much evidence. This isn't a trial. Don't conflate the standards. And from my perspective, especially when you listen to what Dr. Baden said, where his head was somewhat bent, the bullet entered through the top of his head. Right. And that was perhaps the fatal bullet. Now, what's important is how the bullets came in. Did they, you know, what was the number of that bullet? But in and of itself, you have enough probable cause. Like, let's not get lost in the sauce
What would
here.
you charge him with, the officer?
Well, at the very least, manslaughter, reckless endangerment. I mean, there are officers who have been arrested here in New York, at the very least, who have been arrested for pulling bullets into people.
I just want to get your thinking. If you were the prosecutor, you would do that if you thought you could get a conviction.
Sure.
So you think you could get a conviction if you were the prosecutor?
Right, but remember, the prosecutors don't arrest. The police do. Like no, we have to do this in order.
I just asked you, you said a minimal charge of manslaughter, then you must believe that you could get a conviction for manslaughter. Do you?
I do. I do.
Well, already based upon no follow-up so far. Nothing beyond what we know now, what we heard the first moment, really.
No, nothing yet, but we're still waiting on additional evidence.
So by the very fact of 6 bullets, you believe the man should be convicted of manslaughter?
I think you have enough to try him for manslaughter, absolutely.
No, you just said you think he should be convicted.
I believe he should be convicted as well. You have enough evidence.
Already? Okay. Well, where do you stand on that? What do you think of that assessment there, Mr. Holloway, what you just heard?
Well, I think that's putting the cart way before the horse. Dr. Baden said this morning that his wounds were equally consistent with someone who might be charging at the officer as well as someone who might be surrendering to the officer. So unless you've got something that breaks the tie, 6 bullets in and of itself does not amount to the standard of probable cause. It's not enough in and of itself to charge someone. A lot more has to be done. You have to be thorough and you have to be unbiased and objective in the way you investigate all shootings, especially one like this that has caught such national attention.
I agree. Last word, Ms. Charles?
I disagree with that. I think you do have enough probable cause. I mean, when you're talking about convictions, you need an entire picture. You need all pieces of the puzzle. But at the very least, for probable cause to get an arrest, you have it here. You have it. You have 6 bullets. You have a young man whose head was bending down and the bullet entered the top of his skull. How is that? And especially when you take into the fact how the Ferguson police has handled this investigation.
Right. If you were Ms. Charles, if you were defending this officer, what would be your defense?
Well, right now they seem to be doing a pretty good job with respect to how they've been leaking out this information systemically.
And what would your defense be?
The defense would be that he feared for his life and that fear was reasonable, and so that's why he shot him.
Okay, thank you so much. Please come back in here. I want to see you again and hear your views again and your assessment. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mr. Holloway, thank you for being, I'm sorry for being slow in getting your name. It's nice to meet you, though. Mr. Holloway,
Thank you, Chris.
And of course, Ms. Charles. This is a hot situation to be talking about on national television. Anyway, up next.